Hello, everybody. I'm here today with an old friend, Rosalyn Fay. And let me just read you a little bit about her before we get talking. 5 years ago, Rosalyn left behind her city girl identity after 25 years in the San Francisco Bay Area. Stressed out, overwhelmed, emotionally and physically exhausted, spiritually disillusioned and unfulfilled, and with a growing list of health issues, she packed up her car and moved to the Northern California redwoods. In the quiet spaciousness of nature and without the distractions of the city, she began to heal. Unexpectedly, she also began to feel again. This is the subject of today's interview: nature, the body home, and what happens when we undistract. Rosalyn is a writer, herbalist, maker of a rose-based line of heart-healing handmade goods, a women's circle facilitator, empowerment coach, and facilitator of community and personal grief rituals. She's passionate about leading women back to nature and to their natural, deep feeling states. She believes it is women's grief and anger that is beginning to fuel real change from the streets to the halls of government. But she believes women must first reconnect with nature before they can speak to what is fundamentally missing because of our soul's disconnection from the earth. She believes this reconnection is crucial in order to inspire the huge mindset shift that is needed to save ourselves from ecosystem collapse. You have a main website for your products. What is that website?
I do. Well, people can find it if they go to rosalynfay.com, which is my name, ROSALYNF is in Frank, AY.com. And then
Great,
they can get to the page there.
great. So good to see you.
Likewise, yes.
I remember when I first met you was, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. I came to your Coolio, San Francisco walk-up apartment, and you filmed me. I think I read the apologies to the Divine Feminine. We did an interview, that kind of thing. And at that time, you felt, very much to me. And then we went out in the evening and met with some people and had a dinner. And you felt to me very much like somebody who was embedded in the urban landscape. Um, and I think at that time you were making a living, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, putting together kind of online videos for people, that kind of thing.
Yeah, at a video production company. Yeah.
Gotcha. And then a few years after that, something happened and it was time to go. So maybe just take us into what that experience was, what was building inside of you, what your internal narrative was, and so how you went from what seemed to be very urban embedded to the moment of realization that it was time to go.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So it's been about 6 years now. My life has fundamentally changed in every way. It's hard to think back to. It almost feels like another lifetime back then. But it was the majority of my life was spent in the city. I was born and raised in Montana, actually, so I have country girl roots. But somewhere along the road, I just felt like the city was where I needed to be, and so I found myself in the San Francisco Bay Area around the early '90s, and stayed there until about 6 years ago. And I got a lot out of the experience. It's a very metropolitan area, very diverse culturally, and I traveled a lot and really sort of opened my worldview in a lot of ways, coming
Mm-hmm.
from very white bread, small, mining town in Montana.
Right.
So there was a lot of value that I got out of living in the city, but over time I realized that it wasn't feeding my soul. It was sort of feeding my ego more than it was feeding my soul. So I had a video production company, and I was working really long hours doing video editing behind the computer. I was at a not super pricey, but moderately pricey, nice flat in the panhandle of San Francisco, and a lot of expenses. And I felt like I was just kind of on this hamster wheel, making it for myself and trying to be successful in this definition that I'd adopted, and realized at some point that I was really unhappy. And also having a sort of a number of health issues going on. So it kind of all came to a head. My roommate situation dissolved, and it was new roommates had moved into the house, and that was feeling kind of strange. And I was just sort of like taking stock of what I wanted. And so I just decided to pack everything up, put it in storage, and move in with my grandmother in Berkeley, just to figure things out. And slowly my video clientele dwindled down to nothing, dwindled down to zero. I couldn't bring myself to edit one more video. That's so much internal resistance to doing that work anymore.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough. So I was living on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with grandma, and really just trying to figure it out for a good year and a half. There was a particularly dark night of the soul where I was in bed. I was in bed a lot then. And I got up and I walked and sat down at a chair and put my hand on my heart, and I said, God, Spirit, anybody, please just tell me what to do. Like, I'm so lost. I have no direction. Just please, just give me something. And in that moment, I heard very clearly, move to nature. And my entire body just relaxed.
Right.
And I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I just knew that the way that my body had responded to those words meant that there was truth there for me, and that was my answer. So I thought, I don't know, maybe I should pack up my car and go camping for a while, explore Northern California. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. I was kind of looking in Marin and places to move to. I also was still broke, and so wondering how I was going to move to nature broke, just on berries and, what the heck. So in this sort of just inquiry, something really magical happened. And I got an email from an ex-boyfriend who, from like 5 years prior, he had started a company in San Francisco. And at the time, we didn't know where it was going to go or if anything would come of it, but he gave me a stock grant in his company. And his company had just happened to just sell to Apple for $250 million. And he said, Rosalyn, your little stock grant is worth some money. So I just felt like, I felt like Spirit was gifting me at this time that I had said yes to my soul's calling.
Right.
Here you go. Move to nature and heal.
And here's some bucks.
To do that.
Yeah.
So I looked on Craigslist and I found this little cabin up in a little community called Cazadero in the Russian River area. And it was drafty and had cement floor and it was cold. And I could have afforded something else, but it had a waterfall across the street and redwoods and a deck in the back. And I just knew that I was going to be spending so much time outdoors that it didn't even matter. And that was the case. I sat under those redwood trees for a good 8 months or so and just healed my body and got a puppy and took long walks and waded in streams and began to really get in touch with myself for the first time since I think I was a child. Like really get to know who I am apart from this created identity, this sort of borrowed identity of city girl making it for herself.
It's amazing how long we can live without having those moments of reconnection. It can go on for decades, and for many people, a whole lifetime, without ever even having an initial experience of a deep self-connection. Yeah.
It does, and it is amazing. I After several months of living in nature, I just thought, how the hell did I do that? How did I do that to myself? I'm never going back to the city ever. Like, I think that, there were some stories around irrelevance. Like if I moved to nature, to the woods, I would become irrelevant.
Yeah.
So there's just so much of a lot of fear of scarcity, of not being able to make a living, um, and it's just they really just were stories. In fact, I'm making a living now, doing things that are so congruent with who I
Hmm.
am
Hmm.
and my soul, and it feels so much better, and I have all this energy and they're not draining me and exhausting my adrenals. And
I mean, before we go a little farther into the story of what happened in nature for you, do you feel as though this is true for everybody, that, that urban life or being kind of locked into the cultural way or something, or both, are necessarily soul draining for every individual? I mean, is that just not a human structure in a way that's conducive to authentic living? Or was it more specific to your particular soul's journey and your particular sensitivities or needs?
yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that I have the answer to that. I just know that it was very intrinsic to my needs. I I I think a lot of people are. I think the fact that I had grown up in nature and I had that reference point
Yeah.
and how I felt and had those memories of that connectedness,
Hmm.
um, was sort of a thread tying me back there. And
Hmm. Hmm.
people who grow up in the city and maybe never have that experience don't know what they're missing, and are
Right.
able to adapt a little better. I do think that we all need nature, and I think that
For sure.
it's it is who we are. Actually, we are animals at the end of the day. We just convinced ourselves that we've evolved beyond nature or something. But it's not the case. We actually need it. So I just highly encourage anyone who's still living in an urban environment to get into nature as much as possible, and
Hmm.
reset your nervous systems and tap into those inner voices that are a little hard to hear in the sensory overload sometimes of the city.
Yeah. So you mentioned in your bio that so going there was, whatever the original intention was, that you came into contact with a deep need to heal that wasn't apparent to you in the overwhelm of the urban environment. And what did that look like? I mean, how did that show itself in your moment to
Mm.
moment life?
You mean the emotional healing?
Yeah. Yeah. How
Yeah.
did it become apparent to you that this was what was called for now?
Mm. That was something very unexpected. I really felt that moving to nature was sort of my this silver bullet of healing, that my body would just heal and I would just be happy all the time, and my body did heal. But another thing that happened that I really didn't anticipate was that in the quiet spaciousness of nature, you can hear yourself, you can
Yeah.
hear your dialogue, you can hear your soul's whispers, you can feel what's going on below the surface, and there's nothing to really distract you anymore. um, I mean, there's always food and there's the internet and things, but not to the extent that there are in the city.
Mhm.
So what I realized was I was really angry, and all of this like rage was just coming up to the surface, and I didn't really understand it initially, but I decided to sort of dig deeper, and it was connected to some childhood experiences and some later experiences. And so I got creative with it, and I painted, and I got kind of crazy with some of the painting process, and ended up taking a knife to a canvas at one point and just creating a canvas of wounds.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of reflected my inner landscape at the time.
Do you still have that canvas?
I do.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Is it up in your tiny house?
It's up in the loft, and I'm not getting it.
All right. Okay.
No, that one will only be seen by me, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I also wrote a one-woman show and performed it called Medusa Lives.
Mm.
So that was very therapeutic. I really felt like I did some real healing through creativity. And through, just going out in the woods and doing some really just getting down on the ground and doing some good primal screams,
Excellent.
I know you appreciate that.
I
Yeah,
do. I mean, you came clean with yourself, with whatever you were holding.
I did. Yeah, I let it out. And I mean, there's aspects to it. You realize there's layers. There's layers to our emotions, emotional experience, and there's personal rage from experiences that we've had, and then there's also collective rage.
Mm-hmm.
That was unexpected too. I realized, a lot of this rage isn't all mine. Some of it's actually my mother's.
Mm.
Some of it's ancestral.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it's 5,000-year-old collective feminine rage
Mm-hmm.
at the patriarchy, at men. And so those are, not things that you just heal from, maybe even in this lifetime.
Right.
Yeah. But I did go through a lot of inner material, and then started tapping into layers of grief that I had, and one of the layers was a real deep layer of grief around disconnection to nature, and sort of almost a self-betrayal of having left what I so intrinsically feel is my home, and this sort of coming home to it, and just feeling this grief of such a long separation, but then also the grief of what's happening to this home, our home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when you were doing some of the work around the anger, do you feel like you reached a place where you could really distinguish personal anger from lived experience in this lifetime from the feeling of ancestral or collective anger? I mean, is there a palpable, notable distinction between those states in the body, and as it moves through the feelings? Or does it all just eventually just start to feel like it's all part of the same pool?
There was a distinction, and that's a great question. I'm trying to think back. I wish I sort of made note of these more nuanced part of the journey. I can definitely tell you that the collective rage feels like something that's a little lower in my body.
Uh-huh.
It's something that feels like it's almost maybe even rising out of the earth up through me.
Mm.
Something that I'm tapped into in the collective through the earth, possibly. The rage, the personal rage is there's a deep heartbreak. There's some of it in my belly. There's some of it in my heart. Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah, it's not an easy question. I mean, it's, yeah, I think we have to reach a stage of having done so much work within the anger that we can begin to really make those distinctions. And I think they're important a little bit because I mean it is an interesting question. Where does the anger come from, and how does it live itself out in my daily experience? And you know, I mean, I think there's obviously so much to be said, and I've written so much about dealing with the personal piece. But it's not enough, right? I mean, because there's just so much of it, and and at what point does somebody begin to feel resolved, because the collective field is so massive and tireless and unexpressed. I mean, we're pioneers, those of us who even can begin to do this kind of work and have a conversation on Zoom about it, because I mean, I think of my ancestry and all the ways anger lived itself out. It was very clear there was no conversation about healthy resolution.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Have you felt a distinction in your body between the collective and the personal?
I mean, I think that I can definitely, if I go into the somatic field, I can definitely identify anger that is particularized to certain people or experiences or events in this lifetime. So that's for sure. And I'm pretty good at that, at being able to keep it there and not projecting it somewhere else or something. Like I know who I'm mad at and I know what I'm mad about. So that's identifiable.
And where is that in your body?
Maybe I feel a lot of it in my arms a lot. I mean, this for me, rage comes through in a very, I don't know. I don't want to know if it's male specific, but maybe a male conditioned way. That it's hitting. It's hitting the foam cube like I did in the Carmageddon film. It's smashing. It's not kicking. It's really upper body. It's coming. My heart, I feel it a lot in the heart area, and I know that after a real strong release, I feel a lot of opening and fluttering in the heart area. It's not really coming from my feet, and I don't really feel like it's coming so much from my hips. It feels more up in here. Yeah, it feels like kind of heart warrior justice archetype or something like that. Like that's really deep in me, that archetype. I mean, so I think for me, this question of how your particular archetypal journey fits into this whole piece around emotionality and repressed feeling and is very interesting to me, because I feel as though a lot of times when I move into what I would experience as a more collective feeling of anger, it feels like it's connected to some sense of injustice and my archetypal desire to resolve injustice or to be a benevolent warrior rather than the malevolent warrior that probably I've been in some past lives or something, and that I've seen so much of in my lifetime and in my family and in my lineage. And it's about cleaning it up so that there's still the capacity for assertiveness and anger, but it's not polluted with unresolved material or the machinations of the unhealthy ego. It's has a healthy benevolent quality to it. Like I feel that in my body. It's yeah, so it's not just mine, but it feels like it's mine to express, or to
get creative with.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like so much of my creative drive for so long has been about trying to create a more benevolent world. It feels like it's been a warrior path from the beginning in many ways. And it has a lot of fuck you to it, but it's not arbitrary fuck you. It's not, it's like I go after, or critically review spiritual teachers, and a lot of men will come on and go, oh, you're doing that to build your following or to get attention. I don't even know what they're talking about, but I get it that that's the male perspective. Like if you're, so few men I know are connected to sacred activism or benevolent warriorship or the desire to make the world a better place now. You know, that they don't understand that you could be moving from some other place in you. That isn't just about the narcissistic, self-serving piece. And yeah,
I had to really dig deep during my decade of political activism, and you wouldn't believe the egos and the personal material that's being worked out, in that arena.
Yeah.
You know, so much narcissism and so much, a projection of, the archetype. And I had to really step away from that and go on a more inner journey because it was part of me was, expressing that way too. I had this archetype of justice and wanting, to just raise my fists at the powers that be. And it was a good expression. It was. I don't know how effective it was, but there was a lot of just unmetabolized anger at ancestral stuff and collective stuff and personal stuff, and I needed to sort of like work that through personally.
Yeah, and it's a good place to do it. I feel as though, when I moved into the law area, I apprenticed with a famous Canadian lawyer, and I was really positioned to become a prominent Canadian trial lawyer and to fight injustice in the courtroom. And I had many conversations with myself where I asked myself where I was coming from, because I think this question of where we're coming from is often the most important question. Not what are we doing, but why are we doing it? I got that really early. I was very psychologically savvy like that, and I was self-admitting. And I realized that moving into that domain, it could be very gratifying. There's wonderful and important work to be done, but I felt like in a way I was sort of just living out my childhood of defending myself against my angry, judging mother. It was like I was just, and so many people I was in criminal law with were living out some unmetabolized, right, experience from their early life. I knew a very well-known activist here who was, forever trying to show his father that he had worth. So this is how he did it, and he didn't do it in the mainstream way because the other brother was a surgeon, and he couldn't become a surgeon. So he was going to go. So it felt to me as though he was kind of trapped inside of this primal interface, this thing that was lodged in early dynamics. And I remember when I left law, it was a very difficult decision, and I felt on the deepest level like had a feeling that I wanted to move from a different place in myself in my work in the world, so that it wasn't about unresolved anger. It was about something more awakened or something, or something. Yeah, like that.
Bring a
But
deeper awareness to it.
yeah, just like, why are you really here? And are you really here just to live that stuff out and keep projecting it outward? Or are you here to move that through and resolve that and then find some more forward moving reason for being here or something that isn't just about living out the unprocessed material, Like process it, like don't ignore it, don't reframe it. It's real, but let's not be ruled by it, because I'm not sure that's going to ultimately change the world. I think where we move from will decide whether or not we're able to make this world a better place, And so I think for me, sacred purpose is about reaching a stage where we work through that enough, not ever all of it, it's not possible, but where we're moving from the cleanest and clearest place within us. And then I feel like our message lands in a completely different way or something. Yeah.
Yeah, not or something. That's
Yeah,
it.
and yeah, you're not just saying fuck you and being a gadfly and a rebel and all. It's just there's some other energy coming off of you, and it affects
I think
the offering.
it's a resonance of service. You've
Yeah,
made something
right.
of yourself
Yeah, right, right.
something greater.
Yeah, because I think you reach a stage where you're a little more healed and gratified, and then your attention naturally turns to then how can I be of service, right? And like you're kind of done with yourself. You're not ever fully done, but you're done enough.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's a place when we come to that,
yeah.
isn't it? It's
Isn't
just
it what?
such a relief when we come to a place in life where we kind of get over ourselves.
It's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it is.
It's
It's
like
a very different feeling. It's a very different feeling. Yeah.
wow.
So take us farther into the journey if you can.
Well, just I thought that might be a good segue in talking about how for me, reconnecting with nature and moving to the redwoods brought me back into relationship with myself in a deeper way, deeper emotional and spiritual levels, but also with this earth,
Mm.
very literally. And I think I've come to, I don't think, I know I've come to a deeper understanding of what relationship is, having moved to nature, because there isn't any bigger example than nature of relationship. You know, that's all it is.
Mm.
And so immersing myself in it, and seeing the interconnectedness of it, and feeling the interconnectedness of it, and having these beautiful, you know, moments more and more of feeling my interconnectedness with it, and my you know, mind and sense of disconnection dissolve, is just widened my being, widened my experience of life, um, broadened my perception of what's possible in terms of intimacy and communion with not just nature, but with other people. And yeah, so I think this is something that the environmental movement um, needs to really get, is that you can't, I've always been an environmentalist. I always knew intellectually, like, the earth's really important to protect and conserve, and our resources are important to protect and conserve. But, you know, I never got it until I moved to nature and
Mm.
developed a personal relationship with very specific trees and the plants that were growing around me, and started making plant medicine and learning about the local environment and the native people who used to live here and how they used to live. And um, you know, it was that process of coming into direct relationship with it that has created a fierce warrior in me,
Mm.
of wanting to protect her. And yeah, so I think, you know, people, this is one thing about living in the city, is that it's really hard to create that direct relationship
Yeah.
with the thing. You know, it's like we and how can you really advocate for something you don't have a direct relationship with? And so this is why I'm so passionate about leading women specifically back to nature, because I think we still have our conditioning, but we have a little less emotional conditioning to work through, in order to really deeply connect to the earth.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sad reality that men have a little more work to do there, a little more armor to, you know, as you know, let go of.
I've heard something about that.
Yeah, you've written immensely on this. And so, you know, I really believe that, you know, we as women need to take the lead in this, um, reconnect to this planet, to this earth, create those direct relationships with it and with each other, and then speak from that place, like you were saying earlier. Like, when you speak from that place,
Mm.
that's where real change, I think, can happen, because that's inspiring. That's coming from direct experience, where you're
Yeah.
sharing the nuances and subtleties of the relationship with this earth, and what it's, you know, the way that it fills you up. And you know, speaking from that place rather than, you know, uh, regurgitating facts about climate change.
Yeah. It just becomes conceptual. So earlier on, you mentioned, when you began discussing that, this idea of you came into a place where you were in relationship to nature, and how that affected the way you relate in other ways. So is there a way for you to convey, for me, and for people who are watching, sort of a felt experience of what that means? I mean, so because we're using language, so of course I understand conceptually what you're talking about. But you're talking about something that you're feeling into, and maybe you become so drenched in that experience that maybe it isn't even possible to language it in a way because it's so much of your life now. But you know, when you're the portal to understanding how relationship works for you, you expressed was this experience with nature, and it transformed it. And so, like, you know, what would it look like for you to spend a day in nature? What is it? How does that happen? How do you commune? Um, how do you find a way into that feeling of connection outside of the mind, you know? And because it's easy, you know, anybody can go for a walk in nature, but that doesn't mean that they're really having an experience of relationship with nature. They might be in their heads, they might be in a rigidified body that can't feel much, they're not feeling sensual, they can't sense anything, you know. So what does it feel like to really have that experience on a dropped in level?
Mm, I love that question.
I mean, and maybe it can't be answered, you know, verbally, but
I'll try.
okay.
No, I think it's, first of all, you know, it's a relationship like any other relationship. Uh, if you want to become intimate with another person or have a relationship with that person, there are certain things you need to do sort of on a regular basis in order to create trust, um, and create the conditions for opening. Uh, you know, you need to show up on a regular basis. You know, you can't just show up on the weekends.
Right.
You need to bring offerings, offer your respect and your reverence,
Mm,
um,
okay.
appreciation. You know, these are all things that we give to each other when we want to be in relationship with the other person. It's the same with nature. These are living beings. They're actually, more and more science is showing that there's sentience,
Hmm.
in that nature is sentient.
Yeah.
And so the more that we can not look at a tree and just see, oh, that's a tree. I've seen a million trees. It's just a tree. And actually
Mm,
sit with that tree
hmm.
and come back to that tree. And maybe it's just a tree in your backyard that you show up to on a regular basis and you just sit with, and you,
Hmm.
over time, you develop a relationship with that tree. And
Right.
I, I mean,
So,
I could go into more of the sort of spiritual aspects of relationship in terms of you know, what I've experienced, but it's very individual. And I think that, you know, it is a trust building thing. Um,
well, I think you've said a lot. I mean, I think that, you know, this idea of seeing something other than just this thing we call a tree, um, which is true to any burgeoning and developing relationship, this idea of actually seeing something sentient, seeing something that has feeling, seeing something that has some form of awareness and attunement, seeing something that's going through an experience from stages of development, you know, younger, older, aging, whatever, all of those things. Um, to develop that capacity, it's a capacity we often can't develop, and because of the triggers in the human field, you know, it feels to me like that this might be a wonderful place to practice,
mm,
um, in
yeah.
a less threatening environment for being able to see another, um, and trust that that other doesn't have malevolent intentions towards you, you know. So this tree appears not to have malevolent intentions, you know. And um, like how some people, we practice on animals for the same reason till they scratch us, and then we're back into our trigger field, right? You know.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, nature has its boundaries as well, and it demands respect, like, you
Right.
know,
Right.
again, like people do. And um, I think once we change that mindset of stop seeing it just as resources to, for our taking, and see these as actual beings that deserve respect. And
Mhm.
plants, I now have a relationship with the plants I work with as an herbalist, and I ask their permission and I wait for an answer.
And how does that answer come?
It's often a feeling.
Mm.
It's a feeling. I don't hear English language when I commune with plants, but um, it's an opening. It's more of a feeling of opening, and I'm feeling like yes. So I know the feeling in my body of like no and contraction and boundary, and I know the feeling in my body of opening and yes.
Mm.
And so I wait for that kind of feeling.
Mhm. I mean, it feels as though what you've been exploring, it's like if I'm in a survivalist consciousness, the last thing I want to do is drop into my heart and feel my connection to nature, unless it's going to serve me on a survivalistic level, right? In other words, if I can get something out of it. This exploration of dropping down into a more surrendered and receptive state of being, where you're not seeing the tree as opportunity or as something you're going to chop down to build a house, but is something that you're going to commune with as part of your relational field, your family, really feels to me like it feels like it's aligned with the healthiest direction for an authentic consciousness, to be able to feel not unity consciousness as a concept, but actually a lived experience,
Mhm.
in an unsafe world, an unsafe world as between humans in particular.
Right.
So how do we take this beautiful experience, and I've had these experiences, and can relate to this, with tree, with forest, with river, um, and then bring that into this still toxic, still survivalistic, still unhealthily animalistic, um, human field, so that we can really see one another in our vulnerable humanness,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I don't know, use this way of relating as some kind of a formula for authentic relating between people, um, because that just seems to be the whole problem. Was it who was the, I can't remember the writer who said hell is other people. It's like, nobody says hell is other trees, right?
Well, it's I had a good couple of years when I moved up here where I just thought, you know what, I don't need people. I'm so good. Like I'm just gonna become a witch in the woods here and kind of disappear and I've really sort of felt myself sort of withdrawing from the world because exactly of what you're saying. And my soul had different plans for me and thrust me into an urban environment, semi-urban environment in Sebastopol. I wasn't able to find a place in the country, if you could believe it, to build my tiny house. I had to go into the south end of town to do this. And the property that I moved to was inhabited by 8 other people. So suddenly I was, while I was like sort of withdrawing into this kind of narcissistic place of self-protection, and like nature was just this womb for me, just this healing nest for me. My soul was like, no, you're getting too comfortable here. You need to take this back into the world. And so I think our souls are just ingenious in that way, and that but I was able to bring, that experience with me, and in the way that I was interacting with the people on the property, and with my builders on the house. It's very masculine. Suddenly, from this womb-like, experience in nature,
mhm,
very feminine, to this very masculine, out into the bright sun every day with power tools and men and building, and I think you know, it was such a humbling experience to leave my life of 25 years and move out here and just give up any sense of identity at all. I didn't really know who I was anymore. I was in such a vulnerable and humble place, um, that it cracked me open, and allowed me to relate to people more on a, to be more open to people.
Less urban cool or whatever
Less
that
urban,
was.
cool, guarded, protected.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
You know, like
Mm-hmm.
this, and just more relaxed in my body, and heart more open, and you know, having had these like just my guts spilled on the floor essentially. You know, coming out of that, you know, it's just you know, when you go through these experiences of deep grief and deep rage, I know you know this, Jeff, it's like it really widens your capacity to
Hmm.
be with those emotions with other people.
Yeah,
So uh,
it becomes much less threatening
much
when yeah, you get familiar with those feelings. It's,
you get familiar with them, and you're able to I was able to have compassion for other people in a way that I wasn't able to before, because I knew the experience, you know.
yeah. I have a very good friend who's terrible with, he can't handle his own anger, so as a result, he shies away from everybody else's. I said, just get comfortable with your anger and you won't be afraid of anger anymore, you know. I
Mm,
mean, if they have a gun, you'll be afraid, but otherwise you won't be, you know. So,
it's true,
yeah,
yeah. I
yeah,
think
yeah.
it's rejection when we're you know, are so triggered by people's emotions. It really it's an invitation to look at our own, like you're saying.
Hmm. Yeah. So now you're in the south part of Sebastopol still, or?
No, so I built my house, and here we are, and I've moved it to back into the redwoods. So I'm back into the trees and very happy.
Great.
So I've recently got a vacate notice from my landlord, so I'm on the search again for another place. But fortunately, my house is on wheels, so
Okay.
I can move it.
And your feeling about communing with humans now and not just with nature, has that movement in that direction sustained itself? Is it intermittent? Do you sometimes feel like you need long periods of time without that?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. My need for solitude in nature is just grown, and since moving up here. Uh, but I'm able to be with people in a way that isn't, you know, that's. I used to think I just have too fragile a nervous system, or I'm too sensitive. I'm too much of an empath to, you know, be out in the world. But I don't feel that way anymore.
I think
And I
the
know because I have my sanctuary in nature, my home is in nature, that I'm able to retreat and fill myself back up and then re-enter the world. Um,
right. I mean, I think the idea that people need solitude because they're trauma survivors or something is a very simplistic way of understanding the human experience. You know, it's sometimes that's true and it's fine, but sometimes it's the soul has a particular
mm,
unique sacred purpose, a journey that's encoded. I believe that. And for some people, that requires a lot more time on their own. Yeah.
yeah. Well, and to really enter into the kind of relationship that I think we all need to with this earth,
Hmm.
it requires that. It requires being in the stillness, in the silence, and with ourselves, and with the plants and the trees and the animals,
Hmm.
for long periods of time.
Yeah. I mean, I've always noticed there's a real big difference between feeling alone in the city and
Mm.
versus feeling alone in nature, you know, in the natural experience. If you drop in deep enough, you never really feel isolated, you know.
No, I felt more my true self there than I ever did city. You know, in the city, I was always like, who am I here? I'm comparing myself to everyone around me. And in nature, you know, you belong. There's just an instant feeling of belonging and home. I belong just as much as the bird on the branch next to me.
Absolutely.
Mm.
You got invited here too. Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. So just let people know, I know you're producing a lot of things naturally now that you're selling through the website. What kind of stuff are you producing?
Yeah, so it was kind of a fun kind of natural progression. After I moved into my house, I called it the Redwood Rose. That's its name because I built it out of a lot of reclaimed recycled redwood. And these ideas just started coming to me of creating this line of kind of homesteady goods, but particularly centered around healing the heart space because I have had such a long journey with grief at this point. And so I really wanted to create medicines and flower essences and things from the environment, redwood tea candles, you know, that I make, and that were healing for me and my journey. And, you know, I'm hoping can be helpful for others as well. So,
Beautiful.
yeah, I have an online shop. You can get there through my website, rosalynfay.com. And it's a lot of it's centered around the rose. The rose is the root of my name, and it's realizing after moving into my house as well that the rose just has always been with me. And when I started thinking back, I would realize interesting stories, the way that rose was showing up, you know, throughout my childhood and adolescence. And it's kind of been you know, we talk about spirit animals, but we don't often think about spirit plants. And so the rose has definitely been a guardian for me. And so I work with the rose, and it's been used for thousands of years for healing grief in particular.
Nice. And there's chocolate too, I think.
And there's chocolate, rose chocolate.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I've got tinctures, flower essences, rose chocolate, rose tea, rose clearing sage bundles, and lavender bundles, and oh gosh, there's like 15 or 16 other things on there at this point.
Great. Great.
Thanks for asking.
My pleasure. Anything else that comes to mind? Maybe anything you'd like to close with, to share with people who are watching?
Well, how about we close with a quote from your book?
Well, okay. This wasn't staged, by the way.
Which is awesome, by the way. Please get yourselves a copy of Grounded Spirituality. It is awesome, and I'm only about a quarter of the way into it, but it's dog-eared and marked up.
You're still in the journey section, the first part? Part
Yeah.
one? Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I love this passage so much, and it really sort of summarizes our conversation.
Okay.
So said was, what if we are not just here together to keep each other company, but to show each other God? And even more startling, what if God actually is relationship in all its myriad forms?
What if? I mean, you know, yeah. I mean, it's the co-creational. I mean, just like, what if like all of this is like, it just stays where it is until we get that. And then if we really get that and we can really hold that, and then we can really evolve that something happens in the co-creational field that changes all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's not just our work to clarify our consciousness so we can be here for all of this. The next step is to clarify our consciousness so that we can actually transform all of this, and that happens not in the individual field of consciousness. That's just preparatory. Although many patriarchal spiritualists will tell you that that's where it all really happens, I've never really been convinced that's true. I feel like where it all really happens is in the relational field. And, all this work we're doing within ourselves is just to get us ready for the next stage where we can really change this world, or our interface with the world, and maybe the world too, and maybe the earth too, through our capacity to be deeply, fully, and completely in connection.
Mm.
I mean, we always are, but to really get that and to grok that and to be that, and so that love isn't just this nice feeling thing, but that it's actually the thing that transforms all of it tangibly and not just on a feeling level.
And I think that's what communion is.
Right.
When we become each other. We become the tree.
Right.
We become the beloved. We become the other.
So when we hear great stories about so-called masters, so let's put aside all my doubts about those masters, people who really have this ability to move heaven and earth or something, and to see beyond and all of that, that maybe what they've just done is learned more deeply and fully how they are always in relationship to,
Mm-hmm.
and that then becomes the launching pad, or the portal to, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. Yes.
So there we go. That's a lot. So I'll wrap up the recording. Is that a good place to stop, do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Jeff. This was a pleasure talking with you as always, and I appreciate the invite, the invitation to this interview. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to hear your story.
Thank you.